And as we have been working our way through the 7-point mind training Lojong slogans, um, we've arrived at this very special place in the teachings. Um, so the practice of Tonglen is where we are in the 7-point mind training. And Tonglen means literally in Tibetan, sending forth and receiving. It's largely a compassion meditation. It's a practice of compassion, of cultivating what we call bodhicitta in Buddhism. And the term bodhicitta it's in two parts. Bodhi, meaning enlightenment, and citta is mind. So it's literally mind of enlightenment or mind of awakening. And really, it's seen to be at its root all about compassion. That compassion as the vehicle to awakening is also imbued with an aspiration to respond to suffering in a way in which we seek to be helpful, to alleviate suffering. So bodhicitta as an awakening practice is really that spontaneous resolve. We can call it a spontaneous resolve to respond to suffering, no matter how big or small, or discontentedness. The Sanskrit word for discontentedness is dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A, dukkha. Often it's translated as suffering, literally. And so our capacity to respond, to awaken through this resolve of responding to suffering or discontentedness, to dukkha, is seen to be really one of the highest practices in the Mahayana Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, and is helpful for us to continue to cultivate a spaciousness of awareness that is really of the heart. It is really of this root of compassion to alleviate suffering. And it's seen to be a boundless quality, an open, boundless, spacious quality. As such, compassion is part of 4 boundless qualities called the immeasurables, or the 4 boundless abodes, which include loving kindness, or metta, which is the first boundless quality. And we may do that in a few weeks. We may do a loving kindness practice together. It's a lovely practice and very relevant, I think, for where we are in our times now, to continue to cultivate and be reminded that we know consciously how to cultivate kindness and compassion in a world of strife. So this is something very precious we can bring to our practice and to the world. And then, so the first immeasurable is loving kindness, or metta. And some of you have heard this term and have even practiced this. The second one is compassion, or karuna is the Sanskrit term. And compassion, the definition from a Buddhist view, is that aspiration to alleviate suffering when we encounter it, that isn't pre-thought out, or there is no formula to it, but it's a spontaneous arising. And this is sort of the heart of bodhicitta, this term of mind of awakening, which happens within the heart. And so compassion being that second boundless quality that is ultimately limitless, we can cultivate it without limit. The third one is mudita, which is empathetic joy, which is taking deep, genuine appreciation and delight in the good fortune of others. So when other people have really auspicious things happen to them, we really genuinely, deeply appreciate their good fortune without putting ourselves in the picture, which is not always easy. Sometimes we may be like, oh man, how lucky they are. I wish I could get that lucky. Wouldn't that be great, right? But empathetic joy, or mudita, is really about fully just letting go of ourselves and our narrative in deep appreciation for the good fortune of others, and the accomplishments of others, the joy that others experience. So, and then the fourth of the 4 immeasurables is equanimity, or upekkha. Upekkha is the is a Sanskrit term. It's also a Pali term. So upekkha is that quality of even-mindedness, meeting all things with an even mind, but still being highly engaged. So it's this quality of neutrality, of balance, of seeing one thing very much like another. If we have a good thought and a bad thought, we just see them both simply as thought. So we've talked about equanimity before, and also in the context of balancing equanimity with compassion, and these two have a very important relationship. Ultimately, compassion is seen to be strengthened by equanimity, that without equanimity, the balance that it brings, we can easily get overwhelmed by opening, expanding the heart and receiving the suffering that is in the world, or our own suffering. So equanimity is that balancing. It gives us the stability within the suffering. And yet, without compassion, equanimity itself can easily fall into apathy. It can fall into basically almost a dissociative quality where we're not feeling anything for anyone. And so they really need each other. There's this constant beautiful sort of place, much like the eagle metaphor we use in meditation, to balance effort and effortlessness together. And we find that zone where we're just sort of hanging like the eagle in air, without moving, without too much effort, but just enough to stay buoyant. So too is that balance between compassion and equanimity. So we're always seeking to cultivate a really good balance. And that balance, that middle path between the two, is wisdom. We would call wisdom. So compassion here, its primary importance in Tibetan Buddhism is really located here in the Lojong slogans as an antidote to suffering, our own and others. And I have two versions of these Lojong slogans that talk about Tonglen. And the first is, last week we did between sessions be a conjurer of illusions, which is really cool. Personally, it's one of my favorite Lojong slogans. And the one that comes after that, which is still part of the second of the 7 points of mind training, says, train in the two, giving and taking alternately. These two are to be mounted on the breath. 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 sources of virtue. In all activities, train by applying slogans, and begin the process of taking with yourself. Begin the process of taking with yourself. The volume that we've been working from, this volume by Thupten Jinpa, where as the editor he's included Atisha's 7-point mind training and the commentary that he uses by Yeshe Chekawa Dorji, Chekawa Yeshe Dorji from the 12th century. And in this version, let's see, again he says, train in the two, giving and taking alternately. Place the two astride your breath, meaning that when you are giving, you are breathing out, and when you are taking, you are breathing in. There are 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 roots of virtue. In all actions, train by means of the words, which is the same as apply the slogans. And here the slogan may be any number of these slogans that pertain to compassion or resentment or things that might compromise compassion. And so beginning the training with yourself first. This is not often how Tonglen is taught. I've known several teachers who just begin by having you practice breathing in the suffering within the world, all the sticky, heavy, sweaty, smoky, dark qualities of the suffering within the world, breathing them in on the inhale, and then breathing out sort of the radiance of your own deep, spacious heart of compassion. And so some of you know the story. When I used to practice this probably about 20, 25 years ago, it used to make me nauseous. And I went to the person who was teaching me, and I explained that, and he said, "Oh, it just means you're doing it right." Now, that wasn't satisfactory. I didn't like the discomfort. So I never practiced it again until about maybe 6 years ago, when I was going through an extremely painful year of letting go of loss, and really felt like I needed I needed something to work with compassion and work with love. And sure enough, these teachings came back, and I consulted with a Lama friend of mine about the proper way of practicing this. And one thing she said was, well, you have to start with yourself. You can't just breathe in the suffering in the world if you haven't trained with your own suffering first, right? So the light bulb went on, and ever since then, well, that year actually, I ended up practicing Tonglen assiduously. And it was amazing how transformative it was for me. At a time where I could have easily been resentful at going out into the street and seeing a loving couple in love with each other and such, I actually felt immense love for them. And I remember one day I got into my car, and I was pulling out of a parking space, and there was this big Dodge truck that had been coming really fast up the street. And apparently I may have been going too slow, so he was honking and flipping me off and yelling, this guy in this truck. And I just looked at him and felt nothing but deep, utter compassion for this man. That was all I could feel. And I went through my life all of a sudden feeling really transformed by this practice. So for me, it's very personal, kind of like through the fire, trial by fire, to practice Tonglen. So, and that said, I feel like, for now anyway, the practice is one in which it's there for us to learn how to hold our own suffering, while also being mindful of others too in the world feeling this very feeling. And so how the practice is generally taught is with your breath, placing astride your breathing, the inhale and the exhale, bringing to mind, how we train with this anyway, is bringing to mind whatever we're feeling in the given moment that may be difficult, and practicing with that. So if we can't identify a particular feeling, it may just be sort of a general feeling of sadness or some kind of suffering, but we can work with this in a way that strengthens the heart, and also allows us to emerge from that fog with much more compassion. So it's a powerful practice. There are many popular writers who teach Tonglen. Pema Chodron, in her books, if any of you have read When Things Fall Apart, Sharon Salzberg, Joan Halifax, a lot of these wonderful, wise teachers who write books that sort of are coming from this Buddhist dimension, who will include Tonglen. And a part of my approach to teaching this practice really is that let's work deeply with our own suffering and train with that. We'll find ourselves transformed in the process. And as part of the practice, we bring to mind others too who feel this feeling that we are experiencing. And then we can basically work up to, if we choose to take this practice further, breathing in the suffering everywhere, all beings who are suffering everywhere in the world, and breathing it in with this very unpleasant kind of visual of dark, sticky clouds of suffering. So, but let's do this first. That's kind of my exhortation to all of us. So I'd go ahead and get comfortable, and what I'm going to do is just guide you through the Tonglen practice that really seeks to help us with our own suffering. And really it's not a complicated meditation. We're really just allowing ourselves to open the heart. It may feel a little initially vulnerable to do this with our own suffering, but as we breathe, we find that we really are able to sort of remain grounded remember that we're in a physical body practicing this. And ultimately, we work with the image of a heart being encased in an eggshell. Some of the teachings, people work with the heart encased in a metal shell. And I prefer working with an eggshell because it's much more easy just to visualize it cracking and having the shell halves fall away, revealing this open sky of deep, profound love. So, and then we extend that to the feeling we're working with and then to all beings. So that's basically the practice.